Good afternoon, and thank you, everyone, for joining us today. I'm Steve Bailey, Head of Consultancy here at JISC, and I'd like to thank you all for sparing the time in what I know are massively busy days for you all to make time for this briefing. It seems impossible to think that just 10 weeks ago, none of us had heard of coronavirus or COVID-19, and yet here we sit today seriously contemplating and planning for, or indeed actioning, plans to close our campuses to staff and learners, perhaps for many weeks. No one person or organisation has a solution to the countless challenges we are likely to face during the coming months. Indeed, it's probably fair to say that we don't yet even know all the questions, let alone the answers. And JISC is no different. Yes, we have expertise in many of the areas we can fairly safely assume will be coming to the fore. And yes, we have digital services that can play an active role in enabling our members to teach and work online. But sadly, we're no closer to having the answer than anyone else. But what we do genuinely believe passionately in is the strength and power of the higher and further education communities that we serve. Bringing those communities together, giving you the platforms and the spaces to be able to raise questions, share concerns, propose solutions and collaborate on answers. Here we believe we can play an important role and are committed to doing so for as long as is needed. Today's briefing is part of that intent. This time last week we didn't have a date in mind, let alone structure and content, and now here we are with the largest number of attendees we've ever had for an online briefing. We're deliberately valuing pace over perfection, guessing that you would rather have resources and platforms that are here when you need them, if a little rough around the edges, rather than waiting too long for a polish you don't need. I should also say that to a degree we're taking a bit of a punt on how best to structure today. Of course, we've been busy talking to you, listening and consulting, both formally and informally over the past few weeks, to ensure that everything we are doing is as closely aligned to what you need as possible. But in terms of the structure of this session, the balance between content and discussion, whether we've chosen the three main areas that out of all of them mean most to you, we've been flying a little blind on that. Of course, the most important thing about today is it's of value to you and that you come away with insights and perspectives that you can immediately see the relevance of and the application to your situation. And you might have picked up examples of good practice or questions to consider from colleagues and peers to take away with you. There's also a vital opportunity for us to hear from you, to gain an even deeper understanding of your needs and a greater appreciation of how we might support you through future events such as this, what they might cover, for example, how and in what frequency you might hold them, hopefully helping ensure that each one is more useful and more relevant than the one before. The focus for this briefing is on working with what you've got, recognition that now is unlikely to be the time for large-scale transformation strategies or even the implementation of new technologies that you have no familiarity or experience with. Instead, and regardless of where you happen to sit in terms of your digital maturity as an organisation, it's likely to be a case of making the most of the platforms and systems you already have at your disposal, regardless of their track record to date. And of course, remembering that ultimately, as ever, this is not about technology, it's about people, your students and your staff, and recognising and doing your best to protect their welfare at every turn. So this afternoon, you'll hear from John Sumter and Zach Gribble, two of our digital platform specialists, about how to consider the role of the platforms you have at your disposal. Then from Andy Tuke, our Office 365 expert, encouraging a reality check when it comes to the potential of your collaboration platforms. And finally from Scott Hibberson and Kelly Moat, specialists in wellbeing and accessibility, about the continued and enhanced need to focus attention on the wellbeing of your people during the weeks and potentially months ahead. These contributions will be short and sharp. Clearly, in the 5 minutes we have for each section, we can only scratch the surface. But hopefully we can offer some fresh perspectives and practical insights to influence your thinking. If it's okay with you, we'll leave questions and discussion till the end of all three sections. All being well, we should have at least 30 minutes set aside for this. But please do ask questions in the chat pane as they occur to you and as we go through. We're going to do our best to address as many as possible, offering perspectives where we can and being honest in where we can't. Some of you already know about the community of practice that we set up last week. It's a team-based space which we've implemented to enable members to collaborate and support each other during the current situation and already has over 400 members. Our intention is to take all the outputs from today and to share them there. This will offer us the opportunity to address any questions raised today that we don't have the chance to, or where we feel there are other colleagues and just not on the call today that we would like to get involved. We'll make the links available, so if you haven't already joined, please do so after today's session. So speaking of JISC support activity to date, I just wanted to take the opportunity to make sure that you're all aware of some of the existing resources we do now have in place. And as you can see, the place to go to for all of this is www.jisc.ac.uk/coronavirus. It's the landing page that we have pulled together so that you can just go to the one place and find everything you need there. Without going into detail, we have a guide on ensuring continuity of teaching and learning through episodes such as coronavirus, where you've got no physical access to your campus. We're also making sure that we keep things moving through at pace, and so there's already 2 blog posts there around various aspects of the implications of coronavirus, home working as well, and we'll be following those up as time progresses with kind of short, sharp overviews, guides, podcasts on the things that you're telling us mean the most to you. And finally, and I've already mentioned it, the community of practice. People are joining almost by the minute, and we're reaching that tipping point now where people are starting to pose their own questions, to think about things and to share their observations with their peers, and hopefully we can start to get some real collaboration from across the membership here. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over now to John and Zach, and John in the first instance, start thinking about what the roles are for your platforms through this current situation. John.
Thank you, Steve, and good afternoon, everyone. So, as Steve said, my name's John Sumter, and in a moment I'm going to be handing over to Zach Gribble. We're both, as you know, subject specialists from JISC, and we want to provide you with some guidance and very high-level advice around the use of platforms during this unprecedented situation. It is important to say the advice is based not only on our own specialist knowledge in this area, but also on the evidence we have gathered by conducting many VLE reviews with members and other platform-related research and discussions in the last few years. First and foremost, understanding what the roles are for your platforms is imperative and is often the #1 consideration we recommend for our members when planning platform usage. Clearly, taking into account the needs of your staff and students is key to your decision making. Another recommendation is the development of baseline and quality standards. How are staff expected to use the platform? What do you want them to do? What constitutes good practice? These can be defined and measured by implementing clear but yet easy and simple standards that are easy to follow and can support staff in their own practice and yet further enhance, hopefully, the student experience even at this distance. High on the list of things to consider for your platforms is enabling a sense of connection. For staff and students, it is imperative in any online learning community, and particularly in these current times, to ensure learners and staff do not feel isolated or disconnected. And by providing access to relevant learning and teaching resources in a variety of accessible formats is just one part of the puzzle to help ensure staff and students still feel connected and part of a community. Going beyond the access to resources, we know students can benefit from being part of a group work where possible, and this can also form part of your consideration when defining what roles your platform should take. And this access to group work can go beyond academic collaboration and help form part of a wellbeing strategy, something that Kelly and Scott will be picking up on later. And finally, for me, just quickly, submissions. Many of you will have already been using online submission for a variety of curriculums, but also many will not have been able to make that leap for a host of reasons. In this unprecedented situation, it is important to support your staff in a transition to online submission and to do that in the most effective way in these circumstances. The creation of short, bite-sized walkthrough materials will be a useful tool on helping staff discover and learn about online submissions and, most importantly, help you help more people, especially at a distance. Thank you, and I'll hand over to Zach.
Thanks, John. Hi everybody. I just wanted to talk quite briefly about how you're planning the roles of your platforms and the strategy around that. One of the most important things we hear from our students when we do VLE reviews and things like that is that consistency is a real problem. And a lack of consistency with looking at information on the VLE and things like that causes quite a lot of concern. Now, when your students are quite cut off and your staff as well, consistency is quite an important thing to get through. And making sure that you're using all of the tools that you have at your disposal for delivering your communications and also delivering your learning and teaching content. It's quite important to think about what organizational examples of tools and platforms you have available to you, whether that be the VLE, the intranet, instant messaging like Teams or Google Hangouts or other platforms, content capture, organizational apps, emails and text services. How are you going to use those tools in a consistent way to deliver your communications as well as your delivery of learning teaching content? I've left out social media here from this list because it's quite easy for key important messages to be distilled or to be distracted from by opinions underneath. So it's quite important to keep your messages quite distilled from other opinions and things that could distract. And once you have that plan and strategy in place and really thinking about how you're going to deliver teaching across your platforms, is to really try and attack the problem and understand what the challenges are and really define what they'll be for you and your users, making sure that the users are able to use the system confidently. So you really think about how isolated users can feel, and thinking about how good housekeeping on your platforms is quite important. If a student goes to a VLE page or something like that, and the content is quite out of date, then you need to think about that experience for them, and really try and test and prototype how you're going to deliver some of this. Don't find out it doesn't work when it's too late. And thinking about how you create supporting resources for your users, whether you're thinking about organizational videos that have the organization branded on them so they feel familiar and they feel safe to use, and think about how your students might feel and maybe think about having walkthrough videos for them to use as well. That's a very, very quick rundown. And of course, if you have any questions about that, please do ask and we will address them afterwards.
Thanks, Zach. Just handing over to Andy Tuke now to focus specifically on the role of collaboration platforms, which is something obviously we're hearing an awful lot about from vendors, in particular the likes of Microsoft around Teams and Google with Hangouts. So just for a bit of insight into where we currently are and what we can currently expect from those, I'd like to hand over to Andy Tuke.
Thank you. Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name's Andy Tuke. I'm the Office 365 solution consultant in the JISC Cloud Solutions team. It falls upon me to do the reality check, really. So if, like me, you spend a lot of time reading blogs and receiving some of the communication from our technology suppliers, you've probably kind of heard many messages saying that, if you just happen to buy their product, then suddenly this can all become quite simple. And as we kind of probably realize, it's not going to be as simple as they would like us to believe. Obviously, there's a number of marketing departments which, as the note says on the screen, have not missed the opportunity to take advantage of the situation from a commercial point of view, which is probably not to be unexpected given the circumstances, but we need to kind of rein this back in a little bit. So let's move to the next slide. What we really need to think about is actually what we can really achieve in the timescales which we are talking about. They're still talking about a 6 to 8 week period before the kind of the peak of the situation. So within that time, we can obviously switch things on very simply, but what we can actually do with them is a different matter. So let's look at the two basic functions which we're talking about from the remote working point of view. We obviously have the business function and we have the remote teaching function. Now, the business function is probably the easiest one for us to achieve some quick results with. I'm expecting that by now a majority of organisations, certain ones on this call, have made some steps into using some of the tools like Teams or Google Hangouts or Slack, and have adapted to the ways of working which those are sort of enabling now. And if our users are familiar with these platforms, then obviously taking that home and working in the same way is quite a simple adjustment for them to make. Some of the things to remember when you are kind of moving to home working, obviously, if you are a Microsoft user, you have a level 3 or level 5 subscription, you are perfectly licensed and entitled to install up to 5 copies of the software, so your users can quite simply go home and install the software on their home computers and work there. They don't have to have kind of your organization's equipment or laptops or whatever to take home. Secondly, don't forget mobile devices. We all have a mobile phone. A lot of us have tablets. There's software for all these packages available. You can do an awful lot from your mobile device very simply. Thirdly, we need to think about it with our files. And a lot of people started using Teams, for example, but not all of us have made the move to moving our files to the cloud, which obviously is going to be a restriction in what we can do. It is certainly from the Microsoft point of view, if you want to move files to OneDrive, SharePoint, that's actually quite a simple process. There are some good tools which are freely available. From the GIST Cloud Solutions point of view, we've got some experience of doing this. If people need some help, we're looking to see what sort of resources we can share through the team community site, which I noticed Edward has put a link in the chat questions to. If you look there, we will start adding all our knowledge as we can, put it in a central kind of location for people. With all these moves, we need to go against the grain. We need to start thinking a bit more tactically and less strategically. We don't need the solution to fix everything immediately. We don't necessarily have to do what's going to long-term be the best solution. We need to get people working as fast as possible. We need to obviously, excuse my dog, we need to obviously document the changes we make. We might need to roll back in the future or adjust when it comes down to it, but obviously we need to probably move quite fast and be quite quick moving. And most important of all, we need to not forget security. There's a big subject there. I haven't got time to talk about it, but again, we will be looking at seeing what sort of resources we can provide centrally for users to take advantage of. Keep an eye on the community channel there. Now, the other half, teaching, I'm looking at the questions. A lot of people are talking about how can they continue remote teaching. Now, if you've started down that route, you might find you can move quite fast, maybe faster than you initially anticipated. But if you haven't, it's probably you're going to be fairly limited what you can achieve realistically. Even introducing to sort of technical savvy students is going to be hard, considering I know a lot of you are talking user bases in the thousands, so it's not going to be a simple task. But if your teaching staff have a good grasp of the platform already, you might find it's worthwhile, to be honest, letting them run with it a little bit. There are certain features which are quick and easy to get up and running. You might want to use all of the platform, but certainly meetings and the communication side of it is quick. If you've got a high level of agility in your staff, you might find that works for you. Some things to bear in mind. We obviously can't guarantee everyone's going to be available all the time. We're going to have to anticipate key people are going to go off sick at some point, so we don't want to have too much dependency on certain people. We are going to introduce risk if we move quickly. That's just going to be the nature of it. There will be some later work to do. And one of the things we need to be aware of as well probably is that if we don't provide solutions for our user base, they're going to provide it for themselves. So we should anticipate there's going to be some shadow IT starting to appear. We might need to just accept that as just one of the factors of life during this and deal with it later. We need to make sure that we're not excluding people. I know after me, Kelly's going to talk a lot about this, but obviously we need to make sure that not everyone's going to have the internet connection or the equipment at home they're going to need, and we need to make sure that we're not missing people out. And I think most important of all, the solution is not really fully a technical one. Technology is a part of the solution we can provide, but there's going to be some quite drastic changes of work, and those are the difficult bits really to solve these problems. But the technology is there for us to use. Most of us have the subscriptions. It is just a matter of deciding what works for us, what we can achieve in the timescales that we have available. So thank you. I'm going to jump on the questions channel now. If anyone else talks specifically about Teams and Microsoft, I'll start answering questions now. Otherwise, I'll pass over to Kelly.
Hi, Andy. Thank you.
You're actually Scott first.
Yeah, you're actually passing over to me, but thank you. Scott Hibberson here from the subject specialist team. A key piece of that will certainly be instrumental in mitigating disruption to both your staff and learners will be to keep well-being in mind. Now, clearly, well-being is very much at the forefront of all our minds right now, and it is very much the responsibility of a number of roles and a number of departments within your organisation, including a certain degree of self-regulation too. But just to be clear, in this session we mean well-being in the context of digital well-being and how a move to online practices affect people. Before the coronavirus outbreak, JISC carried out research which provides insights into how teaching staff are using technology and how they feel they're being supported. I want to give you a couple of the headline findings relating to well-being. What we do know from the report is that staff are not always sure where to access health and well-being services online, with only 40% of staff in FE and 20% of staff in HE agreeing that they felt that they were informed about their health and well-being in the digital workplace. So clearly there's further work that needs to be done communicating to staff where they can access support. Depending on what platforms you use, it's also worth investigating the built-in features that help staff to monitor their own well-being and usage. And again, we've got some useful links that we'll share to the community of practice afterwards. Another key finding from the report is that teaching staff, especially those in FE, get most of their digital support from other teaching colleagues. With the shift towards remote working, organisations need to think about what peer networks can be put in place to create opportunities for people to work together more. Supporting digital well-being is an important part of the duty of care that organisations have, but it also contributes to wider accessibility and inclusion issues, which Kelly will pick up on later. It can be difficult to know where to begin when approaching how digital will impact on individuals. JISC has developed a model on screen showing the 4 aspects of digital well-being for individuals and briefing papers for both practitioners and senior leaders. These resources provide you with a really good starting point and outline some good practice principles to help inform your own planning and processes. Now, it was published on the Wonky HE policy site this weekend which universities have already moved to remote working. However, some universities are using this week to support their staff whilst they make that transition to an online working environment by setting up dedicated teams. These teams typically comprise of staff across the organisation, including comms, to ensure the well-being of staff and students and to triage enquiries for support. We already know that remote workers miss out on a number of factors that benefit our mental health, and with the current situation, staff are even more likely to feel isolated as social activity outside of work will also be reduced. Add to that, staff may also suffer undue stress because of unexpected childcare duties resulting from school closures, additional strain on the home internet connection, and quiet places to work in the house. Some colleges have taken the decision to pay a sum per month for staff towards their broadband costs, and some staff are provided with a dongle on a case-by-case basis. Structuring staff workload throughout the day to involve joint online working with others and opportunities to check in with staff regularly to make sure that they're okay will help to reduce the isolation factor. JISC has also produced a guide with effective tips on remote working that we will share with you afterwards. I'm going to pass you over now to Callie, who's going to pick up on well-being from a student. perspective.
Thanks, Scott. A sudden shift to remote learning will cause anxiety for lots of students, and we need to be especially mindful of students who are vulnerable and disabled, many of whom will already be self-isolating. Planning services with the hardest to reach students in mind means that you'll be bringing everyone else with you and reducing the need to retrofit. Some disabled students rely on one-to-one support for study skills or mental health mentoring. Access to these services will now be even more crucial and will need to be delivered remotely. How can we use technology to ensure students feel connected to their peers and have access to the support they need? Especially in FE, students may not have their own technology, and those who use assistive tech could find themselves unable to access their work. Student support staff will need to identify students who need to borrow equipment, and they may need to borrow it for longer. If you don't have kit to lend, check out smartphone apps and inbuilt assistive features on Windows, Chrome or iOS. We're aware that all this is happening within the context of new accessibility regulations, which now make it a legal requirement to ensure that new digital content meets certain standards. These standards ensure that disabled students can access important information and course content. This approach has benefits for all students, though, as it builds in quality and ensures that content will display well across multiple devices and browsers. The best approach to accessibility right now is to signpost staff to simple guides that will enable them to quickly ensure content is accessible. For example, this popular Sculpt guide, summarised here, provides useful quick tips. You'll find more about this and lots of friendly support in JISC's accessibility community of practice, where we talk about everything from subtitling to strategy. How do we ensure safeguarding processes are maintained? Do your current policies include online safeguarding? Moving online may expose students to new risks. For example, bullying or harassment may be less visible. Staff will also be worried about vulnerable students and what to do if they're at home when a student tells them something concerning. When video conferencing, you may be aware of a student's difficult home circumstances. Meeting with students one-to-one online may cause concerns about breaching boundaries or etiquette. We need to ensure that both staff and students are protected and understand how to maintain boundaries. Please join us in the team space related to this briefing to talk through concerns and find solutions. We'll follow up any questions you post here in the chat box or additionally in the team. And I'm picking up on the question there about the link to the Sculpt guide. I'll pop that on the community team as well.
Great. Excuse me. Thank you, Kelly. Thanks to everyone for your contributions. That's it in terms of the pre-prepared content from us, if you like. So it's really over to you now in terms of how you want to use the second half of the time that we've got today. We've already got a couple of questions in the question pane specific to the content that you've heard. Thank you, which I'll come back to in a second. Thank you very much for everyone who's already sharing links and resources which people might find useful. It's great to see that happening already. Let me just see if I can pull up the... Adam has... thank you, that's better. Adam has asked a question, what is recommended if staff don't have the internet speeds needed for teaching online? I don't know who might want to pick that up, whether either Zach or John might have a perspective on that. Just whilst they're sort of getting their thinking caps on, it is very much an issue that we are alive to. You know, we do know, particularly in FE, but I'm sure not exclusively, that there are also significant numbers of learners who live in households that may not have connectivity and or smart devices. So challenging that assumption, again, as we have been doing throughout, that this technology is the answer, and about making sure that we do not end up inadvertently ostracizing and separating some of our learners. I'm sure there are no easy solutions to that, but I'll certainly offer up the mic. Chris Thompson's heads up our digital practice team. Chris, would you like to come in on that one?
Yeah, no, I saw that question that was coming through, and it really kind of got me thinking. So for the last kind of 5 minutes, I've been ignoring everything else and trying to ponder that one. Um, I, I'm thinking the question of resource, as Steve, as you're saying, is a difficult one and quite often very difficult to overcome, particularly when you've got students from more deprived backgrounds. I think what I'd suggest is you want to be if you are, particularly if you're looking at creating online resources or online modes of engagement, you want to be focusing on tools and techniques that basically requires as low bandwidth as possible, so that somebody that doesn't have a particularly strong broadband connection, or perhaps a rural broadband connection as well, can easily access the resources. So what I was thinking is kind of avoiding things like videos at full HD, for example, or long videos at full HD, and going for things which can be watched over a lower speed. Using resources that are also responsive as well, so it can be used on mobile devices as well as they can be used on desktop. Just so you're giving people kind of more options about how they access stuff. The other issue about kind of mobile devices is that because people might be using their own kind of data for accessing this, if they don't have Wi-Fi at home, for example. That's another reason for wanting to kind of keep the bandwidth on that low. So there's a bit of a balancing act, because you do want to be creating resources and ways of engaging that are rich, that are engaging, but at the same time doing it in a way which kind of has that bandwidth mentality sort of at the back of it. But I'm sure other colleagues and other people in the chat will have other suggestions for kind of how to approach that.
Hi, Steve. Can I just pick up on one thing that Chris mentioned, because he gave a really good overview there. And one of the things that often comes up from a kind of curriculum design point of view, really, which let's be honest, a lot of teaching staff may be in quite unfamiliar territory on this transition towards online learning. It's important when you're doing your planning of your activities that you plan in some asynchronous activities, so you don't have all your learners accessing at the same time, because that reduces that pressure and strain on the bandwidth. So that's always worth thinking about. Think about designing a range of activities that your students are not necessarily accessing at that key point in time.
Can I just emphasize that point Scott's made about the asynchronous stuff, and giving, because it also kind of reduces the pressure, I think, on teaching staff as well, that not everything has to be live. Doing live stuff on the internet, yes, it can be very, very engaging, but if you can find ways of making it asynchronous so people can engage with it at different times, it means there's kind of less of that kind of performative pressure, which I know some people that are not used to doing stuff online really don't like. But the other thing is that remember that if your learners are going to be working from line, they're going to be from home or remotely somewhere, they're going to be working in very, very different contexts with different pressures on them. So yes, they might be working from home, but if they've got kids, the kids may well be home from school. They might have somebody self-isolating in the household. So being able to kind of access things at a point where, rather than say, right, you've got to be online at 3 o'clock to do this thing, that it can be engaged with at some point over the course of that particular day, could be really quite powerful. But that's not to say that doing stuff which is timed and live can't be a good thing to do. Sometimes if you're trying to kind of create a sense of energy in a group that's very now disparate, you want to create a bit of momentum in the module, having a point where we say, right, well, we are going to get together at 1 o'clock for a short session on this, just as a kind of a catch up, almost kind of a social element. So I think if teachers are looking at, as Scott says, the kind of curriculum design for how you do this, think about that context issue while you're doing that planning.
Great. Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Scott, as well. Interestingly, there's been some validation from Edward Swan of that notion, I think, Chris, that you made about looking to perhaps record as much as you can, or do things asynchronously, but from a slightly different perspective in terms of recording being a better option, because staff have expressed concern with childcare if schools are closed. And so the recording, although obviously less interactive, can be one way in which they can work flexibly around that sort of scenario where they're trying to balance domestic life that's also in upheaval because of self-isolation, etc., with actually continuing to support and deliver learning. Ed also makes another point around resources from the Khan Academy, which can be downloaded, so potentially used in scenarios where it's harder for people to get connectivity, or connectivity all the time if they're needing to share bandwidth, etc. So that's another resource perhaps to consider. Another question which I think has been raised, I think it's an interesting one because as with all these kind of fast-moving situations, you do get a little bit of sort of Chinese whispers and some kind of false rumours and views kind of circulating. And Heidi Dixon had read that Microsoft E3 licenses only allow up to 15 concurrent Teams meetings, which, if were the case, would clearly severely limit the potential for Teams as a kind of teaching and learning platform, given the number of concurrent classes that most of us would have running at any one time. Andy, I think you suggest that probably isn't the case. You just want to sort of grab the mic and just sort of talk us through what we think is the situation with licenses, if that's okay.
Sure. Yeah. So the question is regarding the limits for Teams meetings. Now, there's two sorts of Teams meetings. You have a Teams live event, which is for doing large, I think it's up to 25,000 attendees. So kind of annual general meetings, events such as this one where people aren't talking back but are all just listening. That's a team live event, and there is a limit of 15 of those running concurrently at the same time within one tenant. Now, within a Teams classroom environment, you would just use a general meeting, and there isn't a limit for that. So you could be running hundreds of classes simultaneously throughout your organization.
That's brilliant. Thank you very much, Andy. Just whilst you're there, and again, I know you've offered a link, but it is perhaps just a bit of context around that. Ashley Hargreaves at Coventry asked the question around anything you could send around the Moodle plugin for Teams. I'm sure that connection between existing VLEs and Teams might be something that's of interest to a number of people. Is it, again, putting you on the spot, please feel free to say it's something that you're not familiar with, but is there anything you can share about what you know about what that plugin does or doesn't do? Or is it just a question of looking at the guidance that's out there?
The Moodle is the only one I'm aware of for VLEs. So you can install it. It looks fairly straightforward, and we are hoping when we get our own demo tenant up and running to do that ourselves in the team. But it will give you a tab within Teams where you can display the files and components from Moodle. I believe if your Moodle is talking to your MIS system and has the capability to create the classes based on them being made in the MIS, then Teams will integrate with that and create the teams automatically. That's what I've been told by Microsoft, and I'm afraid I haven't seen it myself. The other newly released plugin is there's a Turnitin one which came out just a few weeks ago. I'll see if I can find a link to the documentation. I'll post that into the questions channel as well. But I know a lot of people use Turnitin, and that's now getting some fairly tight integration with the assignments part of Teams.
Great, thank you very much. There's a couple more on specific platforms, and these are probably very open-ended questions that could go in a number of different ways, and are probably, I think, hopefully the kind of questions where the community that was set up will be able to come to the fore. But I'll open up generally to the panel in terms of whether anyone has a specific observation or experience. One is around, Michelle Robertson's asked whether anyone is using Canvas and has any tips and tricks. And clearly, it could be in a lot of different directions, but specifically around how they might be utilised in the situation that we find ourselves. And the other, Shelley Corley, has asked around, would anyone suggest using Google Hangouts to run interactive sessions? So I'll sort of stand back, and if anyone on the panel has got experience that they think would be useful in this context around either Canvas or Google Hangouts, would be welcome.
Hi, Steve. It's Zach here. I think the one thing I would say is with all of the platforms, they're all very capable platforms. And without thinking too much about the actual name of the platform that you're using, I think the design of the content and the resources that you want to use is most of the platforms, in fact, all the platforms should be able to do it in some way. There are universities and colleges using Google Hangouts in exactly the same way that some institutions are using Microsoft Teams. It's all about having the content designed in a way that that platform uses, say, interactivity and interaction between different users. I think that's the best way I can explain it, is that all of the platforms are all very capable of delivering content that can cover us over a situation like we're dealing with at the moment. I think it's just a case of really understanding that the knowledge that you want to pass over and the interactivity that you want to pass over. Again, please feel free to put comments into the site on Teams, and we can take discussion further. And hopefully there'll be other users that are using those platforms in that way. I think that's the best way to get platform-specific experience with using those. But I would just say that it's design. Make sure that the design of the sessions or the content that you want to use is designed around the sort of interactivity you want to use as well.
Thank you, Zach. Yeah, good observation. Anyone else want to come in with any perspectives, either generally or around Canvas and Google as the two that have been specifically mentioned, or make more generic points across the piece?
Well, Steve, John here. Just to echo some of the points that have already been made, I think in this particular situation that we see ourselves in, it would be prudent to focus on the tools that we already have in place, rather, obviously, if you don't have any and you've got to bring them in, obviously you've got to do that. But where you've already got the tools in place, just as Zach was saying, it's more about focusing on how you can best use those tools you've already got. And that might actually be not looking at the technical side, but looking at the people side and what haven't you been doing to support and upskill and train your staff and students, and what can you do now, rather than putting the emphasis on what new tools can we bring in. So that, I think that's an important point to make.
Great, thank you. Okay, just picking up the question, and I've lost who it was from. There was a question around what, if anything, JISC is doing at the moment in terms of negotiating. We go from Robin Ashdown. What sector negotiations is JISC attempting? Anything with Zoom? Yes, we are looking at all of the suppliers that we have contact with and in active conversations with a number of them, Zoom included, and we are talking to various other of our contacts in Europe to see how they're approaching other NRENs in other countries. So that is something that we are actively exploring at the moment. We are also working with all of the publishers that we deal with through JISC collections and things like eBooks Refi, just making sure that wherever possible we can make the case for making the content that they have that might usually be behind various paywalls as open as possible. Clearly the decision ultimately is theirs and a commercial one, but we are in a good position to be working as the ambassador for the sector with publishers to try and make sure that we can get as much access as possible for our members. So yeah, obviously as soon as something is ready, as soon as something is announced, then we'll be making members aware of that as quickly as possible. Just checking whether any further questions have come in. If anyone else from JISC has spotted any that I've missed, please do let me know. It's obviously tricky keeping tabs with everything. Can't see any others yet. People are helpfully suggesting other areas of support, all of which we'll obviously be capturing and sort of feeding back. So don't feel the need to be frantically screen grabbing or note taking. Whilst you are thinking of that, as a sort of further thought to promote further conversation, I wonder, Edward, perhaps you could pull up the question that we have. One of the things we're hearing a lot at the moment is this tacit, if not explicit, assumption that we can suddenly spin up remote working, online learning across large numbers of people very, very quickly. And I would certainly be interested, now from you on the call, but also if you want to put an observation in the chat pane, what the greatest incorrect assumption you think that people are making about that rapid change. Some interesting observations coming in already. Certainly the notion, I'm just reading Ashley's comment in the chat pane, that it will happen overnight. So, that is something that, a message that we've been pushing, that the technology clearly is important. It wouldn't be possible at all if it weren't for the technology, but equally that it isn't a silver bullet that is suddenly going to cure everything, and that the context is absolutely everything. That's interesting, Azar. Whilst we were attempting to use systems such as Teams, we are now noticing system issues such as performance. As we are in JISC, actually, obviously we've got an awful lot of activity going on with our own Teams tenancy with the community of practice, where we're rapidly adding new users, and there's a lot of activity going on and more home workers than before. And certainly we have started to notice a few performance issues from Teams. So I think that is highly likely.
Steve, can I just pick up on a point on some of these answers that we've got coming to these questions? It's pretty obvious, really, but I think it's really interesting to see that, given this question and at this time that we're in, that we still do have these questions being asked, or people saying, is online learning as good as face-to-face? Does it replace face-to-face learning? And all these questions that we've got here, we've got 41 so far. The question about, can you just transfer offline learning straight to online learning? Is it cheaper than? It's amazing in this day and age that we're still actually asking these questions, but in actual fact, this list of answers that we've got here are really good evidence for when people in their institutions are going back to their senior management, their teams, and saying, look, we've got to do these changes, or we've got to put in place something to combat this tricky situation we're in, that a lot of these answers are directly kind of answering some of those questions that they will be asked. If we go online, is it going to save us money? Can we just copy and paste what we were doing face-to-face? Well, we know it's not the case. And the fact that we're being given these answers to this question, I think, is very interesting and certainly quite thought-provoking.
Thank you, John. Kelly, I noticed in the chat pane. Sorry, I didn't mean to speak over somebody. Kelly, I noticed in the chat pane you've got a bit of a conversation going on around transcripts, and you mentioned a system, I think it's called Otter. I don't know if you just want to, I know it's taking the conversation in a different direction, but I just wonder whether it'd be useful for people to hear a little bit more about both the need there, but also what that might offer as a tool.
Yeah, sure. Something automated transcription is something I've been looking into a lot, because when on the 23rd of September this year is the next deadline for new accessibility regulations, and from that point all pre-recorded video needs to meet accessibility standards, which is that it needs to be subtitled or a transcript provided. So lots of people are kind of experimenting with this and trying it out just now, because obviously if it can be automated, that's going to save you like loads of time. And so this is just one that I've been using, Otter, which is an app. It's free for the first 600 minutes per month, and then you can upgrade to premium. It's just one that I kind of really like, because it's very easy to edit if it's made mistakes. And it gets, over time, it learns to recognize different speakers and things. And it's quite easy to share as well. You can kind of collaboratively correct it. Providing a transcript is like super helpful to loads of students, obviously those who are deaf or have hearing loss, but also lots of other students as well who maybe want to check the spelling of what you said, or who just find it easier to process, or if they're using assistive technology as well. So yeah, that is called Otter, like the animal, OTTER, and it's .ai. There's a bunch of other tools as well, and I know sort of colleagues have been trying out various other ones offered by like Google Transcription, kind of live subtitling as well. Yeah, MS Teams can do live subtitles, so can PowerPoint and Google Slides as well. So there's a few different ones available. I just pick out Otter because I find it like really easy to use, and because it's on your phone, you can kind of take it around with you, or you can import video as well, like a little MP4, and it'll convert it quite quickly. I think some members of the training team have been using Otter to generate transcripts for recordings of webinars and things. So it's just a wait. So if anybody finds another tool that's really cool, then do let us know as well, because they're all starting to kind of emerge now as the need is there.
And again, I think thank you, Kelly, and I think that's where the community collectively can really come into its own, because there's never a perfect system. There will be preferences, and there will be things that one does well and another one does slightly differently and better in another context. And just being able to share those experiences of where you found something working well and where you found its limitations, I think will be immensely valuable.
Steve, could I
no, yes, sorry.
I was going to, there's been the questions which went up. There was a couple of comments there which I've noticed in my sort of demonstration with members in the Teams platform too, but I assume it's the same with the rest. Is a lot of these things, particularly the kind of the assignment side of it, work very well with words. So if you're doing an English course, you can hand in essays, and that works beautifully. When you start doing maths and you want to start having freeform numbers and things, it gets much more difficult. And I saw someone talking about sciences. So obviously, doing remote learning of a chemistry lesson is going to be quite difficult, if not impossible, for a lot of it. So I'm kind of interested in how people deal with that if they already are doing remote learning, get past the limits of the platform when it comes to handling non-text based kind of work.
Thank you. Yeah, and by all means, please continue to put responses and observations around that. That would be much appreciated. I'm sure other people would find it of interest. I am aware of time. We have 5 minutes left. Ashley has asked whether it would be possible to meet again as a virtual group in a couple of weeks' time, which kind of neatly, whilst we begin to draw to a close, preempts a final kind of couple of questions for you, really, which Edward might be able to pop up for us. And that's really around, whether you would find it useful for the foreseeable future. Obviously, things will change over time, but for us to be running similar such events, and what kind of frequency, but also what you would like us to focus on next time around, and any observations around the kind of the balance, and whether you'd like more from us and less of the kind of the shared conversation, or actually whether you like it the other way around, and for us to speak less or even not at all, and to share the whole time for yourselves to explore things. I think would be really useful, and will certainly help us. What we're going to do is tomorrow morning take some time to look through everything that's come up today, also to look at the other sources of member voice that we've got coming up, so that we can start to plan sort of weeks 2, 3 and 4 and beyond in terms of our response. So we'll certainly be getting back in touch very shortly. It's looking like there's certainly an appetite for a weekly at the moment, and with some saying fortnightly. So unless we find some evidence to suggest otherwise, we will probably be looking at setting another one of these up for next week, and obviously we'll get dates and information out as soon as we can. Thank you for those that have also added some suggestions about where we might look to focus other sessions. That would be great. We will be sending round a sort of standard customer satisfaction type, how you found it. So please do let us know what we could do to make the next one better. They were very aware that the first one was always going to be a bit kind of trial and error to a degree, as we get the balance right in terms of how you think we can best use these sessions.
Steve, answering to something.
Yes, of course.
Sorry, Andrew Quinn just asked in the question whether we'd be enrolling all attendees on the community team site. We're not. I think Zach did actually sort of answer the question. We're not specifically doing that. I mean, I'm just going to drop in the link to the community site registration sheet. Because of the fact that we put all this together quite rapidly, if we had a bit more time, then I think we might have put together a process which is a little bit more streamlined. So, turning up at one would then automatically enroll you for the other. So it's partly to do with that. Introducing an extra step into the process. Hopefully it shouldn't take you too long to register for it. We should get you online pretty quickly. I think there's also kind of GDPR things, because we are using two separate systems, about us taking information from one without explicit consent and putting it into another. So it's kind of coming from that direction. So bear with us on that one. But hopefully you will join us in the community and add your contributions to it. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris. Indeed, and what we were aiming to do is to obviously see the nature and the extent of the conversation, the questions that have been asked, and how many we did or didn't get a chance to respond to during the session. What we'll look to do is to replicate that within the Teams community, so that those that have asked a question, looking for perspectives from others on the call or experience of using particular platforms, we'll look to make sure that all of those are available within the community, so that both those that are here now and want to join get the opportunity to answer, but also those who are perhaps part of the community but not on today's call will also get the chance as well. So as we draw to a close, feel free to obviously continue with the questions on the screen. I'm just going to check with my colleagues from JISC as to whether anyone's seen anything in the chat pane that it feels it would be unwise to ignore at this, even with a minute to go. Okay, I'm going to take that we've at least addressed the major ones, but recognise that there's an awful lot, still here for us to pick through, and we will. Thank you, everyone, for your time today. I do hope you found it useful, and I look forward to no doubt speaking with you very, very soon, possibly next week, and communicating with you through the Teams channel, or indeed wherever else our support takes us over the next few weeks. Thank you, everyone. Keep safe, keep well, and we will speak again soon.